Hi guys, welcome back to class.
Welcome back everyone for lesson 4. Today we're going to be learning how to render an object using value shapes. Okay, we're going to start by laying in the background and sketching where everything is. When I set this up to shoot, my drawing already started before my pencil touched the paper. I was thinking about movement, balance, the rule of thirds, and carefully setting the format of the shot. If you start with a bad design, really no amount of careful rendering will fix it. Now as you're sketching, make sure that you're constantly looking back at your reference. Don't just assume you know what it looks like. Use your shoulder and just lay everything in lightly. Don't push too hard. When you press down with a lot of pressure, you're forcing the graphite into the nooks and crannies of the paper's texture. Then when you want to go erase it, your eraser can't access those places and you're left with a ghost line that you can't get rid of. And for the shadows, a cast shadow will always be the same shape? It'll always be the same shape as the object that is creating it. It'll just be stretched out a little bit. So in this case, our shadow shape is a circle stretched out and it becomes an ellipse. For the sketching, I'm using a 2B pencil. Or if you're having trouble with pushing too hard, try an HB or 2H pencil. Now that we have our sketch in place, let's start laying in some value.
Mr. B?
Yeah, Q, what's your question?
What's that line in the middle of the ball for?
That's my reference for where the shadow begins.
Okay, thanks.
Now we don't want any lines in this drawing, just value shapes. In real life there aren't outlines around everything. So rather than making a dark heavy line around the yellow ball so that we can see it, we're going to put a dark shape behind it in order to define that edge. Start in one direction and fill in the space generally, then switch and repeat, like cross-hatching. This method will give us the most even tone across the whole shape. I'm going to grab a piece of tape just to make this go a little faster, then I don't have to worry about keeping that edge straight. Now I'm switching to a 6B pencil, which is very soft and it's easy to get dark values with it. And you can fill in large areas with this pencil quickly if you hold your pencil on the side so you're getting maximum graphite to paper contact. I noticed that, looking at the reference, the left side of this value shape is a little bit darker. So I'm going to lay down a little bit more graphite material on the left side using the side of my pencil and trying to make that as even as possible. This video is sped up just a bit. It took me about 30 minutes to draw the whole thing start to finish. If you enjoy this style of tutorial, please let me know in the comments. Or if you'd prefer more of a time-lapse drawing with some voiceover, we can do that too. My idea for these lessons is that you would be drawing along with me as I did them. So they're kind of in real time, just a little bit faster. Because you can always pause it. Anyway, let me know what you think. Once the material is there and on your paper, you can use your finger to push the graphite into the tooth of the paper and smooth everything out and make that value nice and even. You get a little dirty, but that's what makes it fun. Now the tooth means the texture of the paper. This isn't drawing paper, it's just regular copier paper, and it has a fairly smooth texture compared to most drawing papers. Ta-da! It worked! Now that we have the silhouette edge of our first ball started, we can start adding value to the light side of this ball. You want to do this part carefully because we are adding the slightest bit of value, and it's much easier to add a little bit more value than to try and go back and take it off. Just use very light, very small circles to go over the light side of the sphere and build up that value until it's where you need it to be. As you're doing this, shade in everything except for the highlights. Leave those completely white. The only reason we're doing this is because the lightest value in the drawing is the highlights. So we have to keep the white of the paper in those areas. So in order for us to see those highlights, we need to add a darker value around it. Alright, let's pause here for a minute and talk about the parts of light and shadow. The area we just did is called the halftone, and the value we're trying to make there is based on the local color value of the object. Yes, it's a yellow ball, but we don't have yellow pigment to work with. We only have different levels of gray. This is the part we're going to draw next, and it's called the core shadow. The object is turning away from the light, and therefore it makes a soft edge value change, or gradient. Now do you notice how this part of the shadow isn't quite as dark as the rest? This is called reflected light. The light is coming from the source, the lamp that I have set up, bouncing off the glossy surface of the table and hitting the underside of the sphere. Alright, let's go back and put those pieces in our drawing. Okay, same as before. Yes, it is a dark value that we're putting in, but it's not the darkest thing in the picture, so take your time and build up the value slowly. I made a very light mark during my sketch to indicate where the shadow ended, so I'm going to work up to that line and make that edge very soft.
Mr. B?
Yeah, Q?
Does the racquetball also have reflected light?
Yeah, it does. It's just really small, but if you look closely at the bottom of the ball, you'll see it there. I like to use my finger to blend out my soft edges, but if you don't like getting your hands dirty, you can always buy a tortillon or tortillion, or however you want to say it, or some people call it a paper stub. It's just a rolled up piece of paper, and if you have the right kind of paper, you can make your own, or you can just go buy a pack. They're super cheap at the craft store. Now, one thing I didn't have at the time of making this video was a kneaded eraser, only because I couldn't find it in my messy studio. If you really want to get into drawing, I highly suggest you buy a kneaded eraser. It's a super cheap investment, and it's a really versatile tool for really taking your art to the next level. You can whittle it down into a point, and you can erase out whiskers out of a cat, or you can roll it up into a ball and use it like a rolling pin, and you can tone down the values of overall areas, and maybe you can erase your sketch lines. They're just really great, awesome, versatile tools to have. And when you're nervous about whatever, you can play with it in your hands like a fidget toy, and you can sculpt a little guy with it when your teacher's being boring. and rambling on and on about something and you don't want to listen to him anymore, you can just sit there and play with your kneaded eraser. It's wonderful. Alright, let's go back to our reference and look at a couple more parts of the shadow. Okay, so this is the cat shadow, but notice something odd about it. Close to the object, the edge quality is pretty hard, and as you move further away from it, it gets softer and softer. And right here is the occlusion shadow, which is almost always the darkest part of the shadow. Now, like I said, this is a pretty glossy tabletop, and we are seeing the reflection of the yellow ball in the cast shadow of the green ball. Just like the other reflected light I pointed out earlier, the light is coming in from the light source, hitting that ball and bouncing off, and then bouncing off the table and then into our eyes. So that's why we see that reflection there. But I don't personally like that there, just as part of the design, so I'm going to leave it out of my drawing. If you ever draw from a reference or life, and you don't like the way something is, are you going to let that photo push you around and tell you what to do? No! You're stronger than a picture. Make the decision for yourself to make your artwork the best it can be. So first we need to lay down the value and keep the edge quality of your cast shadow pretty sharp to start out.
Oh, Mr. B, I can't see anything. There's a huge glare.
Yeah, thanks, Q. Graphite is naturally a very glossy material, so now that we have some down on the paper, my overhead light is causing quite a glare. Let me turn that off and we should be able to see what we're doing a lot better. Then you can use the material you've laid down on the paper to feather out the edge as we get further away from the object. And oh my gosh, I was not paying attention to the shape of this shadow as I was drawing it. My biggest mistake was I stopped looking at my reference. Let's erase that back out and refine the shape a little bit. Let's learn from our mistakes and keep checking our reference, which for me is a printout of a still of the video I took because I don't want to draw in the dark. Okay, that's a little bit better, but let's just move on for right now. The next sphere is much darker, so we're going to start by filling in the shadow side, the core shadow, and then working our way to the halftone. As you go, make sure you're keeping your silhouette edge hard and your core shadow soft. that edge control is really what makes it feel realistic. Now let's look at the highlights on both of the balls. The green ball has a matte finish and kind of a rough texture. It's a racquetball. And the highlight is very soft. The yellow ball is very glossy and smooth, and its highlight has a much harder edge. The edge quality of your highlights communicates to the viewer how shiny your ball is, or whatever surface you're drawing. So let's make that highlight nice and soft to communicate that dull finish on the sphere. A lot of amateur artists would stop here and give up. They take a step back and think their drawing's ugly, which is untrue. It's a nice drawing, but it can be better if you're shooting for realism, that is. This is called the ugly stage, and every painting and drawing goes through it. You have most of the values laid in, but there's really not much there that has been refined. And if you choose to judge yourself at this stage, you may get discouraged. Keep working it and refining the details. It's the small details that really make it feel like a sphere rather than just looking like one. So let's keep working. I'm going to soften up that edge in the core shadow and refine the texture of the sphere a bit. Now let's put in the cast shadow, just like before, except this time we're going to look at a reference. If you use the lessons you've learned in lesson 3 and 4, you can draw anything you can imagine. These same techniques can be used to draw buildings, landscapes, animals, whatever you'd like. All you have to do is look at your reference as value shapes and control those edges. If you've got that down, you can draw anything you want. Little lighting change because it's later in the day now, and I'm going to put on some music and really refine those details. Here I'm using the tip of a very sharp pencil to even out the texture. There are these little small pockets everywhere that didn't really get enough graphite, and so I'm using a sharp 2B pencil to force more material into the fibers of the paper, specifically in those areas. See, before and after. A little touch up here, a little refining, and we're all done. I hope you had some success today and you had lots of fun with it. Next week, we're going to start learning all about perspective and how we see the world. It's going to be really fun. So we'll see you next week. Ciao for now, guys.